So I want to begin our time together this time with answering the question of how to live a spiritual life in a godless world. But before we do that, sorry, from an enlightenment perspective, the problem always is the nagging issue of duality or two-ness. So even the notion that there's a difference between a spiritual life and a non-spiritual life for an awakened person from the perspective of awakened consciousness doesn't make any sense. Because from the perspective of awakened consciousness, consciousness itself is always awake. So the essence of self-reflective awareness, the essence of self-reflective consciousness, the essence of being aware of life, being aware of the life process, being aware of existence is inherently spiritual. And there's nothing unspiritual about any aspect of life. From the awakened perspective of non-duality, the totality of life and of the capacity to bear witness to life within and without ourselves, within and without ourselves, within and without the universe, is the recognition of a quality of aliveness, a quality of sentience, a quality of suchness, a quality of interiority, the feeling of being, spark of life, the evolutionary impulse, the vibration of existence, to awakened awareness is all the recognition of living spirit. So when we awaken to enlightened awareness, we see every aspect of life in all its complexity and paradoxes and contradictions as pregnant with spirit at every step of the way. There's no place where spirit is not. So from the perspective of enlightenment or enlightened awareness, spirit is conscious awareness itself. It's the recognition of being alive, and it's the recognition of the life force itself. It's a recognition that the cosmos itself is vibrating with conscious awareness, is vibrating with sentience, is vibrating with interiority, is vibrating with suchness, is vibrating with spiritually enlightened self-conscious awareness is everywhere, at all times, in all places, in all circumstances. So from the perspective of enlightenment or enlightened awareness or non-duality, spirit is everywhere, and there's no place where spirit could not exist, because the very nature of everything that exists and everything that does not exist is spirit itself. So that's the perspective of non-duality or awakened consciousness. So from that perspective, from the perspective of non-duality or the ultimate oneness of suchness, of the vibration of being itself, vibration of the evolutionary impulse, the very question between living a spiritual life and not living a spiritual life doesn't make any sense, because from the deepest perspective, you can't not live a spiritual life. You can't not live a spiritual life, because life is, as I've been trying to explain, spiritual. One can be more or less conscious of that fact. One can be more or less aware or not of that fact. And obviously there's many differences in between different people. Some people are very aware of this, some people are barely aware of it, some people are not aware of it at all. But from the perspective of awakened awareness, spirit exists at all times, in all places, through all circumstances, and therefore the very question of the difference between living a spiritual life and not being a spiritual life is superfluous. It doesn't really mean anything, because all life is spiritual inherently, because that's the very nature of everything that exists, and everything that does not exist is spirit itself. So that's the beginning, that's the foundation. But of course, those people who recognize that's the case, those people who recognize that spirit is the ground of being, spirit is the ground of all existence, And there's no way you can get away from it as hard as you try to. There's no escape from the overwhelming presence of spirit everywhere. There's no way to escape from it. When you realize this, it has an effect on your consciousness. It has an effect on your heart and your mind and your relationship to life itself. It tends to awaken a sense of peace, joy, exhilaration, and a deep sense of confidence that life is good, life is beautiful, life is potentially glorious, so pregnant with potential and possibility. And one notices that inherent in the recognition of the life force itself, that the life force is alive. Inherent in being conscious of consciousness is a recognition of a primary vibration, a primary fundamental principle that speaks of perfection, wholeness, integration, love, that which is infinite and eternal. And when our fractured ego, which is trapped in the illusion of separation, it recognizes that isolation, since separation never was real, it never could have existed. It's like coming out of prison. It's like falling out of a prison. And one realizes that everything is okay, and everything's always been okay, and everything will always be okay, because spirit is the essence of all things. So the more we realize and awaken to the nature of spirit as it always is, the happier we are. And because of that, because we recognize that spirit is the foundational principle of all of reality, seen and unseen, known and unknown. When we recognize that, we tend to want to give it priority. This is why all the great religious traditions give the recognition of the God principle or the evolutionary impulse, the primary spiritual principle. This is why all the great traditions give that impulse primacy. They say, oh, this absolute principle, this God principle, the spiritual vibration, this essential spiritual vibration is the fundamental essence of all things. And when we give our attention to that principle, we experience unreasonable joy and unimaginable happiness, because that's the nature of the life principle itself. When we don't give this principle primacy, when we don't recognize this principle, when we don't awaken to it, when we don't become conscious of it, we don't pay respect to it, we suffer inherently. We suffer from a sense of isolation, alienation, loneliness, the sense of being lost in the big universe. So, of course, for those of us who recognize the primacy of consciousness, the primacy of spirit, we tend to give the significance of spirit primacy in our relationship to life and the way that we live it. And most spiritually conscious people, or all spiritually conscious people, do that also in their own ways. All those people who recognize the primacy of spirit give that primacy of spirit in their own life. They honor the primacy of spirit in the way that they live their life. And they usually live their spiritual life in public, not only in private. But when we live in a materialistic culture, in a culture that doesn't recognize the primacy of spirit, and when the shared cultural agreements are that matter alone is real and everything else is imaginary, that there's no inherent interiority, interior dimension to reality, then you have to start, if you're living in a culture where the shared values and shared beliefs and shared agreements are basically materialistic and nihilistic, if you have awakened to the truth of interiority, the primacy of the spiritual principle, you might feel you have to live your spiritual convictions in private, because other people might see you as being crazy or misguided, because you have recognized that the nature of consciousness is interiority, and you've recognized that the whole universe is vibrating with interiority or withinness, or with consciousness or subjectivity. And you can see it and you can feel it, and it's everywhere. But for someone who doesn't see it and doesn't feel it, you can seem like quite a crazy person. And the problem relating to the question of how to live a spiritually conscious life in a secular world is really this. So the issue for those of us who are spiritually inspired, spiritually inclined, is that we realize that the issue is the problem at a cultural level is a matter of value, shared values. Unless more of us become convinced of the primacy of spirit, relationships to the totality of reality, there's always going to be this dualistic split, this division between those who know and those who don't know, those who have faith and those who don't have faith. And for those of us who have at least partially woke up, have awakened to the infinite nature of the interiority of the cosmos, and how that relates to consciousness itself, it becomes obvious to us that all the problems that we're facing as a global species, all the problems that we face personally and collectively, have to do with this question of consciousness. And it becomes obvious to us that the fundamental reason that we have trouble getting along with each other, the reason that there's so much division and suffering and violence, is because it's a lack of consciousness in so many areas and so many dimensions of our life. And so then we come to understand the spiritually awakened person realizes that in the end, the solution to every human problem can be reduced to the evolution of consciousness. The solution to every problem can be solved when consciousness evolves. So when the significance of consciousness, the primacy of consciousness, and the radical imperative of awakening to consciousness becomes apparent to more people, when it becomes a shared value, a shared spiritual principle between us, the human species will be capable of extraordinary acts of creativity that right now is just beyond our capacity. So at a cultural level, the challenge we're facing is a matter of shared values. And the fact that so many of the values we share are not in alignment with the higher potentials of spiritual awakening. At least that's how it seems from the perspective of awakened consciousness. But getting back to this theme about the inherent non-duality inherent in the awakening to consciousness itself. And when we awaken to the non-dual nature of consciousness, which is considered to be the highest level of spiritual awakening, by the way. A lot of people speak about non-duality in a way that's very easy to speak about it, but awakening to non-duality or oneness or not two-ness, or the ultimacy of consciousness, is not a small thing. It's a big thing. It's a rare thing. Very few people actually do it. But if it's possible to do it, and some people do succeed, when you arrive on the yonder shore of oneness and not two-ness, as I was saying before, there is no place where spirit is not. So one recognizes the absurdity of thinking that spirit could not exist in one place, exist in another. So, for example, some people think that spirit is more present in a monastery or in the top of a mountain or in the middle of a forest than it is in the middle of a city or some other place. So the solution to the question of how do I live a spiritual life in a secular world, of course, is awaken to non-duality, because when you awaken to non-duality, you'll see spirit everywhere. And you won't divide your life up into, this is my spiritual life and this is not my spiritual life. Because it doesn't really make any sense. If all life is inherently spiritual, by nature. It's unavoidably, absolutely spiritual. Every aspect of it, even our ignorance and our stupidity and our unconsciousness is inherently spiritual, because it's all occurring within the context of consciousness, and consciousness is the ground of being, the ground of the infinite. So even our ignorance and our stupidity, even all the problem of ignorance and violence is not separate from spirit itself. Ultimately, it's all part of one process. And in the awakening to this experience of the singularity or this non-duality, you see it's all one process, it's all one event, it's all made of the same stuff. And there's nothing wrong with the stuff. The stuff is all spirit, but the problem has to do with our own lack of consciousness, our own lack of awakening, our own lack of our ability to be able to see these things because of our own ignorance. And our own ignorance is a result of cultural influences and our own personal psychological developmental process. So from my perspective, when you realize that spirit is everywhere and spirit is the ultimate nature of all things at all times and all places of all circumstances, you see all of life is spiritual. It doesn't matter where you are, it doesn't matter who you're with. The only thing that matters is what you see and how deeply is your capacity to bear witness to it. So spirit does not exist outside your capacity for conscious cognition, conscious awakened recognition of the nature of reality as it actually is. So how present we are to spirit has nothing to do with spirit itself. It has to do with our own capacity to cognize it. If you can't cognize spirit spontaneously, naturally, easily, obviously, and effortlessly, you're going to have to create a lot of rituals. I know you're going to have to organize your life in such a way that will help you to become conscious. And a lot of spiritual practice is done to help us to become conscious of what we can't see. A lot of spiritual practice is things we can do through effort that will help us to see things that we can't ordinarily see. But when you can see naturally, spontaneously, effortlessly, and easily, you don't have to do anything anymore, because you know the spirit is everywhere, at all times, in all places, for all circumstances, even in hell. Spirit is also the very foundation of the nature of hell itself. Spirit is everywhere. So, to repeat, so if you can't see it naturally, spontaneously, and easily, and effortlessly, you have to organize yourself and do all kinds of practices and ritual procedures that will help you to focus your mind, focus your attention. It will help you to wake up. But the basic point I'm trying to make is that there is no inner versus outer, ultimately, from the perspective of non-duality. And that's the ultimate truth. But it's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to live it. One thing to say, it's another thing to live it. The more you awaken directly to the thing itself, the more you awaken directly to the thing itself, as I said before, the way you live your life will become an expression of what you've realized. Because if you awaken in a way that's profound and real and stable, you won't be able to prevent yourself from transmitting the glory and the inherent and instantaneous liberation that comes with the awakening to absolute non-duality. You won't be able to hide it. You won't be able to pretend that you don't know what you know. And some people will love you for it, and other people will hate you for it, but that's how it works. Because awakened spirit is contagious. It's contagious. It's like a divine disease. And if you're very sick with the divine disease, you can't hide it. Everybody's going to know there's something different about you. So the ultimate answer of how to live the spiritual life in a godless world is by becoming deeply and profoundly enlightened. That's all. Wake up and go all the way and don't hold back. Allow yourself to let go of the mind and of all ignorant and foolish ideas radically, totally, and completely until you awaken radically and completely yourself and become profoundly awakened. Then your life will become a spontaneous expression of an awakened consciousness. A spontaneous expression of awakened consciousness where there's no difference between the spiritual life and an ordinary life. Because the way you live an ordinary life when you're an awakened person it's the expression of a spiritual life. So the question I wanted to ask everybody tonight when we got together was, it's a provocative question, but how would you all live the life that you're living now? How would you all live the life you're living now if you weren't seeing any part of your life as more or less spiritual than any other part? What if you were no longer seeing any part of your life as more or less spiritual than any other part? What if you were no longer dividing, making these crazy divisions in your life and the way you're living it, between what's spirit and what's not spirit? In your relationship with your husband, wife, son, daughter, in relation to money, sex, time, mind, everything. If we're no longer making these distinctions between what's a spiritual approach to all of these questions and what is a non-spiritual approach, what if you stop thinking about it that way? What if you saw it as all one thing? What if you didn't allow duality to enter into your conceptual framework anymore, into your conceptual apparatus, as this nasty habit of dualistic thinking, which most people are struggling with unknowingly? But if you refuse to do that anymore, and we just saw it's all one thing. It's called life. It's life. It's not even my life. Because my life is dualistic also. It's just life that's happening through me. If life's happening through me, and I realize that life is happening through me, then what is the most spiritually appropriate, spiritually inspired, conscious relationship to life that's happening through me? So, of course, from an enlightenment perspective, the only solution to living a spiritually conscious life in a godless culture is to become an exemplar of awakened God consciousness, even if you're the only one in the room. Even if you're the only one in the room. It takes a lot of courage and a mild bit of fanaticism. Because there's something happens to you when you actually have enough spiritual experiences to realize that the universe does have an interior dimension to it. That the inside of the universe, or the interiority or sentience, or some expression of sentience or some capacity for sentience, exists everywhere, and that the whole universe is alive. And there's so much that we can't see or know most of the time, but when we begin to wake up, we begin to glimpse that the universe is a system, and the system is awake. And your capacity for consciousness and self-reflective awareness is part of that system. But none of us exist outside that system. And the system is here to help us, to support us, if we recognize who we truly are. We're never alone, not really. So when you realize that the system is alive, and that's who you are, you're part of that system, you're a small part of a inconceivably vast system, and that being alone is not possible, and that the system is there to support you. If you are true to who you truly are, then it gives one a sense of, it awakens one to a sense of spiritual self-confidence and a sense of exhilaration about being conscious of all this, being conscious of consciousness and conscious of the system that is all of consciousness. It exists all the way up and all the way down the spiral of becoming. It's everywhere. But when you realize the system is alive, and our capacity for awakened awareness gives us the ability to be aware of a little part of the vastness of the whole system. When you realize that the God principle is the whole system, that is self-aware, that there's an inherent intelligence in the system. And the guiding principle is unimaginable love and perfection. The perfection is reaching way beyond itself to manifest its own perfection in ways that we can see and we can't see all the time. But then that's waking up is realizing how much is actually happening here, which most of the time we don't see. Most of the time we're just sleepwalking, watching a bad movie called our own lives. So the way to live a spiritually conscious life in a godless world is to become a living expression and embodiment and emanation of spirit yourself. And then you want to be able to do that to the point where people realize that you're not living two lives. A lot of people who have spiritual practices and spiritual faith, they live a double life. They live one life pretending to be like everybody else. Then they have a secret spiritual life that they live in private. When they show their true self to the universe or to their few friends who share their same spiritual inclinations, but they're not living two lives, they're living one life. And I think to live the spiritual life in earnest, this has always been my attitude, I'm considered to be an extremist, is that we should actually, if we want to be free, we should start living one life and not worry about what other people think. If we're worried about what other people think, we're always going to be trying to fit in, to make other people happy. But if we want to make other people happy, we'll never be free. We're always going to be slaves to other people's opinions and ideas and thoughts, judgments. Consciousness scares people. Too much consciousness scares people. The enlightened mind, the enlightened heart, frightens the unenlightened mind and unenlightened heart. It scares it to death because it's too much freedom. Too much freedom, too much authenticity, too much fearless authenticity. Most people are so frightened and so trapped in their bodies and in their minds and in their memories that they're just not, they don't know how to be authentic, they don't know how to be free, and freedom is frightening people that don't know what it is and don't know how to embrace it. So to live a conscious life, to live a liberated life in a world where few people are actually very conscious requires an enormous degree of commitment, determination, audacity, and abandon. Because when you really begin to wake up, you realize at a certain point there's no way back. There's no, when you begin to wake up at a certain point, you realize there's no need to pretend anymore. Because who are you pretending for? Who are you trying to impress? Because when you become conscious of consciousness, you realize the nature of the God principle is your own self. Then ultimately, the only person you need to impress is your own self, because you are the thing itself. In fact, everybody knows that, or at least they think they know it. See, we don't want to have to live to please other people. We want to live to please our own true self, which knows the truth and embodies the truth and expresses the truth and demonstrates it. And the way that we do that is by letting go of everything that's false and anything that's less than everything. When you let go of everything that's less than everything, you begin to feel the power of that authenticity, that the power of truth consciousness starts surging, vibrating in your nervous system. You start feeling very courageous. And that's what scares people to death, is the vibration of authenticity, fearless vibration of authenticity. But as people are afraid of it, they're also attracted to it. Because people can feel the power of the vibration of the freedom of enlightened awareness. People feel it, and they're attracted to it like bees to honey, while they're simultaneously afraid of it. So ordinarily, the question of how to live a spiritual life in a godless culture would be, how can we come up with the appropriate rituals and ceremonies that would be culturally acceptable in a post-postmodern culture and all that kind of thing. And I think that's a reasonable conversation to have, but it's kind of superficial at a certain point. Because the only thing that's not superficial in the end is the actual awakening of consciousness itself and its own perfect expression. And the only thing that's going to transform culture in the end is the awakened consciousness itself. And all of the greatest realizers throughout history always, if they were really deeply realized, most of them found themselves inspired to create a cultural revolution based upon the miraculous discoveries they made in the context of their own awakening. They're saying, "Oh, wouldn't the world be wonderful if everyone, wouldn't the world be wonderful if everyone is enlightened like me?" It's funny, but it's true. These are for people who've really gone all the way off the deep end. That's kind of how it goes. That's kind of how it works. If you discover the ultimate secret to happiness and to meaning, and the recognition of the inherent perfection that we can discover deeply within ourselves, if you made that discovery, you want to shout at the rooftop. You want to shout at the rooftops. You want everybody to know about it, because it's the answer to every question. It's the answer to every prayer, and nobody knows about it. Nobody believes in it. It's a miracle and a mystery, and it always has been and always will be. We can't really understand it. We can just realize it. And if you realize it, as you realize it, the thing awakens to itself within you, and you become one with it. And then you live your life, and other people will feel it. So to get back to the question that I brought up before, I wanted everybody to wonder, to think to yourselves, how would your life look, or in what ways might your life be different than it is now, if you were no longer making any distinction between what you consider to be spiritual versus not being spiritual? What if you were not living this kind of duality anymore? And think about it very practically in one's relationship to real things, like I said, to every aspect, all the important and challenging aspects of being human.